Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unfuck Your Mind. I'm your host, Zach Lyotis. And in today's podcast, I have Devin Galaudet. Devin is an editor and publisher of the In the Now Traveler and the In the Now Bride, which chronicles have endeavors to marry his wife in 100 countries around the world. So far, they've been married 21 times in 15 countries. Devin has written for the Huffington Post, the Good Men Project, and many others. A frequently sought-after guest expert on relationship and travel, Devin has appeared on Fox TV, NBC News TV, Reinvention Radio, the California Writers Coalition, JohnnyJet.com, the Jewish Journal, and hundreds of podcasts. And Devin's memoir, 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes, is available everywhere. Welcome, Devin, to the podcast.
Zach, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a fun conversation, I know, because we've done it before.
I know. You were the second podcast. This is our second one together, and you're podcast number 2.
Really? I didn't know we had started that early on together. That's fun.
I know, and that's the thing. I woke up today, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited to have Devin back on because we had such a great podcast the first time around, and now with your book, 10,000 Miles of My Dead Father's Ashes, I was like, I can't wait to talk about that. But yeah, podcast number 2, if anyone wants to listen to our previous conversation, go there. But we're here right now and really excited. So let's talk a little bit about your new book, 10,000 Miles of My Dead Father's Ashes. Give us a little synopsis of the whole book.
That's such a tricky thing because it covers a lot of territory. But basically, it's the relationship with my father. He was, and I say this with great love in my heart, a con man, a dubious character, a thief. And for probably the first 30 years of my life, I tried to be just like him. Wow. And I think I nailed it. But it's not a sustainable lifestyle. It's not a kind of lifestyle. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that you do out of desperation. And he was one of 13. And I want to have sympathy for it. And at the same time, life can be a really challenging place. And so we sort of moved away from each other. And obviously the book explores why this is. But according to his 7th wife, his last request was to go back home to Cadiz, Spain, where he could be scattered. And he was not Spanish.
That's the funny part, right?
Yeah. And so I ended up taking him, and it's sort of like this trip it sort of represents all of our own trials and tribulations that, I tried to work with him for, my entire life. And, what's ironic is I really learned something. I think I learned more from him in death than I did while he was alive.
Wow, that's a huge statement to make. What are some of the greatest lessons you learned in his death?
I think that I really got it into my heart that he gave me the blueprint of what it was that I didn't want to do.
Interesting.
It took a long time to realize that because, I think we look at our fathers as sort of like, this is what a role model is supposed to be. This is what a man is supposed to be. I didn't know. And so all I could see is what his day-to-day life was like and how he dealt with problems. And, that's what I took into the world. And if I wasn't behaving that in a way that looked like he would do it or felt like he would do it, then I felt I was failing as a man. And when you're in your, when you're in your late teens, your early 20s, even into my 30s, I thought I was doing it wrong.
Wow, that's so interesting because now I always say this is the era, this is the year for a lot of men to come to rise into their divine masculine and to who they truly are without the wounds and the beliefs and the patterns from what we were raised as kids. But you had a lot more things to work with. It looks like you watched your dad through this process. You became your dad, and knowing, later on in life that that wasn't the way to be. So when did this awakened moment come to you? When did things fall apart for you, and then you had that aha moment, or were just things basically stirring up in your being as life was going on?
I mean, that's such a big question, but I think if there is a singular point where there was really like, wow, the mask came off, so to speak, is there was a point I spent, and I go into detail into this in the book, but I spent a fair amount of time when I was a teenager dealing out poker hands. I would deal like 7 hands out at a time, 8 hands out at a time, with the singular goal of, if I'm stuck with this hand, what would I do in order to win? And of course, this isn't always possible, but that was the goal. And I got pretty good. I got pretty competent at poker, and I understood it, and I studied body language, and I looked for tells. In other words, things that people did that gave away what they might be playing. And I learned about, strategies and odds and probabilities. And, I did it because I assumed from the stories my father told me that he was an expert, and I wanted to be that. And then we finally got across from each other in a poker table, and I basically dragged him. There was a game in Las Vegas that was fairly cheap, and I sort of demanded that we go, because I kind of wanted to show off and say, look, your son is almost like you. And then after watching him for about 20 minutes, it was like there was a moment where there is no Santa Claus, for lack of a better description.
Wow.
He was just a sucker. He was an action junkie. And honestly, it was painful. It was painful because I had lived my life making these assumptions about who it was I thought he was. And it was to sort of have the realization to watch him just lose repeatedly was actually horrible.
You never expected that bite from your father.
No, of course not. I think we grow up with a certain sense, I think we see our fathers with a certain measure of invincibility.
Yes.
And I think that's important. I think it's important that we see, our parents and our role models as being sort of, more than what they are.
Yes.
And perhaps there's a lot of parents running around who measure up to those expectations. That's not my experience. But in seeing him be that terrible at cards was actually really devastating, because I had so much invested in it emotionally and time, that to really get it through my head, oh, you got this wrong. You got this wrong. And your father he's a gambler, but he was terrible at it.
Yeah. And it's funny that you said that. He's a gambler, and I heard in my head, it doesn't mean he was doing it right.
Yeah. No, he wasn't doing it right. I mean, again, I think in many ways he was a good man, but, he was one of 13 children. He was one of 3 sets of twins in a row. And I mean,
oh, wow.
like in a 4-year period. I mean, I think you can look at the picture. I mean, these were, and so I think he had to make up his own rules. I think he had to fend for himself. And in that way, I got far more than what he got. I was really, it took me even longer time to realize how blessed I was. But it takes a while. And it's very easy, especially when you're young, to be really selfish and think yourself as terminally unique, when really, I can look back and start comparing lives of other people, and certainly my father, and go, wow, you know what? I did pretty well. I did pretty well even with him.
Yeah, your greatest teacher. And I have your book here, 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes, and I still haven't read it. It's my read that I'm taking to Nicaragua with me, but I asked Spirit to bring me to a page. And interesting, I read 3 pages in a second, it felt like it. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to dig in this book, because of just the stories of everyone, like the family protecting each other But yet, even though you're his son, no one was telling you where your own father was. And here's a line that that came to me. And I want to talk about this because, yes, we look at our parents as role models. We look at our parents as maybe someone that we want to mirror. Not in my case. I understand not in your case either right now. But it's just something because speaking about the masculine energies, we were taught to be strong. Well, not me, but men are taught to be strong, not to show emotion, to make more money than their woman, to be the protector in so many ways. But it's interesting here what you say. You said, even at a very young age, my father was unreliable and unpredictable. He was being exactly who he had always been. Even though I wanted him to treat me differently than the rest of the world, I wanted to feel like I had a special place in his life. Hell, I was his son, after all. Now that I was less like an only child, I had more reason to see his wind likeness. I felt betrayed. Then it hit me. Dad's behavior was not about me. It was a brief moment of clarity, and I hung up the phone for good. And this is when you were speaking to your Aunt Jessie.
Yeah.
And I want to have a conversation about that realization that you made, because he wasn't who you thought he was. And we just spoke about this, so I knew you were going to know about energy around it. But that awakening moment of realizing this has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. I mean, I think, I think as we get older, as we grow up, we have these expectations of people, and then we start, by being adults ourselves, start having a better understanding of what these things actually are. I think my father actually cared quite deeply. Mm-hmm. And I think he also had sort of like, here's a system of life that he came up with that seemed to work for probably many, many years. And it was fun until it probably became not so fun. And he didn't have any other tools. Change is terrifying for most people, even the smallest change. So for him to have done anything different, especially coming from, he was a product of the 30s and the 40s. Do you know what I mean? In poverty. And I think he lived his life as best he was capable of without really getting instruction for living, or without sort of looking any deeper than sort of the surface level of life. Mm-hmm. And so the way he behaved towards me wasn't like, I'm singling you out as a jerk. He wasn't like, I think he loved me. I actually think he loved me quite a bit, and I hope the book reflects that. Mm-hmm. But I think he was very limited in what he could do when then there was problems. In other words, if he had feelings, then what? What do you do? And I think he was probably much better at, hey, this is making me really uncomfortable. I'm just not going to deal with it, even if it was me. And I think that awakening that you're referring to was really, I think, incredibly powerful for me, because I wanted to point fingers at him and say, you're doing this on purpose and you're hurting my feelings. And the truth of the matter was, he wasn't doing it on purpose. He was doing the best he could, but he was so limited in his own ability to confront his own life circumstances or to deal with me as a person, that he did what he always did. Do you know what I mean? It didn't matter who I was.
Yeah, just about to say that.
So that recognition for me was really big stuff. It allowed me on many levels to forgive him. Now, in fairness, when I started writing this book, it was a lot of, you're the worst jerk who's ever walked the earth, and I hate your face, but you're my greatest hero, so what do I do?
Yeah.
And, that was like the first two drafts was really my therapy session. Mm-hmm. And then it became much more about, okay, it's not just he was a jerk, because that's not what being human is. So I had to start really kind of getting beyond my own annoyance, mm-hmm. to start really exploring what it was, who it was that I really thought he was. And, cut him some slack and sort of, understand his life in the context of what it was, who he married, my mother, and who it was that I, with, sort of like, I was riddled with expectations of how he could be a better father, which we could argue is fair or not fair. It's probably more fair when I'm 6 and probably far less fair when I'm, 40.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's so funny that you said that, because I've said this to myself a couple of years ago when I asked the question, why did I come into this family? And even me asking that question was so big to me, because I'm like, why wouldn't I come into this family? Like, I have the greatest sister, the greatest brother, the greatest parents. And the question still went down as, why did you come into this family? Why did you decide to be part of this family? And I had to sit there and I had to say to myself, you have to stop having these expectations on your parents, thinking that they should be a certain way because you want to make them a certain way. And you just need to allow them to be who they are, because they're doing the best they can. And they have no blueprint. They had no book. Like, we're full of resources now and all the sorts of help. But back in the 70s or the 60s, for some people, parents didn't have those resources. They did the best they can from the teachings that their parents gave them.
Right.
And I always looked at my mom and my dad as, the last couple of years more than ever, as my teachers. So regardless of what you did that thought was so right and I didn't like, what did I learn from that? So what were the many lessons that you learned through this whole process? Your dad who had, many different titles to him. I mean, he was a character on his own, but what were some of the greatest lessons that you learned within writing this book? Because it was your therapy session for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, I think I described it a little bit just a minute ago, but I think probably the biggest lesson that I had to learn was compassion. I think that, and I didn't understand this, I think probably when I started writing the book. When I started writing the book, all of my annoyance towards him had to do with him not fixing me. In other words, I didn't want to fix me. I didn't want to have to look at myself. I mean, ultimately, that's what I did. But I wanted him to do it. I wanted him to have all of the answers, because honestly, my own frailties and my own imperfections made me uncomfortable. I don't know. Sometimes there's social circumstances in life that I don't know how to deal with it, and problems that I don't know how to fix. And I expected him to do it all. Mm-hmm. And then when he showed himself, or when it became apparent that he was just a human guy, I didn't like that. Like, how dare you? You're actually inconveniencing me with your humanness. Mm. And so I think I really got it through my head that he was deserving of my compassion. Mm. And in that way, it's like, now I can be compassionate to myself. You know what I mean? Like, I think we get good as we get older because we've had so many life experiences. It's like, okay, this won't be so bad. I can figure it out. But we're still going to come upon, new experiences that we don't know how to fix, make right, and at some point we have to allow ourselves a measure of compassion to just be flawed and not know what we're doing. Some days we're going to get it right, and others we're not. We're just going to do it wrong, and we're going to insult somebody or offend somebody in the process. And I can only hope that they're going to have the compassion that I seek for just being some guy. You know what I mean? Some flawed individual trying to figure it out, trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good father. This is all very tricky stuff.
Yeah, and I love that you say it's very tricky stuff. It's like, accept me for who I am, flaws and all, and I might not be that superhero that you think I am, but I'm my own superhero. Let me show you who that is. And that's what is so beautiful when I see men rising up from the old wounds and the old beliefs. It's like they become so powerful in their own superhero way. So what advice would you give that male that's going through the disconnect with his dad and needs to basically, rise up and move into his own self? What is some wisdom you could give that?
Honestly, I would probably say something to the effect of take what you like and leave the rest. In other words, for me to hate my father, that would imply that every single thing about him was worth throwing away. That's absolutely not the case. The compassion part is to realize that he did a lot of things really well. He was warm. He was funny. He did a lot of things really well. But it's very easy for me it was easy for me for a very long time to throw the whole thing away. And that's unreasonable. I think in writing the book, I could see all of the wonderful qualities that he was. And I had to allow that to sort of shine in my heart. And if he didn't live up to my expectations, that's really more of a representation of me than it was of his shortcomings. And don't get me wrong, he made a whole slew of terrible, dishonest mistakes.
Yes.
And at some point I have to forgive that because there's no usefulness. In other words, the longer I'm pointing fingers, the more I'm not learning from the situation.
Oh, I love that you said that. I always say that even when I was going through my process of healing between my mom and my dad and myself, it was like, okay, look in the mirror. You're in charge of you. There's no more pointing fingers at anyone. So I love that you said that, but I love the line that you used, shine in my heart. So you brought that shine in your heart. And that's where many men have this difficult time, is shining within that heart, because you're never taught as a man to work with your heart. You're always taught to cover that up, cover up your emotions. So explain what you mean by saying shine in my heart for those that have a difficult time shining from that place.
I don't know if there's a system of rules, so to speak, in how to do that, but I think what it means is that I have to show up as best I can every single day with the knowledge that I could get it wrong. In other words, if I am focused on all the things that I don't do well, I'm probably not going to walk out the front door. And I'm not going to show up for my daughter, and I'm not going to show up for my wife because things are scary and uncomfortable, and they're annoyances, and it's upsetting, and it's all of the things that we as a society deal with. You know what I mean? In other words, any conversation that we have that fixes society, there's going to be an alternate viewpoint that's going to say, well, what you're doing is terrible and wrong. Right? And it's very easy to do that. In other words, we have this sort of like very, very black and white thinking where the other side has to be wrong. And we are morally just in pointing fingers. I'm morally just at looking at my father and going, you're the worst jerk face in the whole world.
Yeah.
So what that means is anything that I do is going to have a group of people saying, well, you're just wrong. Anything I do, there's going to be some sort of negative consequence. And my job, I believe, as not only a man, but as a human being, is to keep moving forward, is to keep taking action with the understanding that it's quite possible that I'm going to upset somebody. I'm quite possible, I don't want to upset my wife. I don't want to upset my daughter, but
yeah. I love how you said that, but
there are these moments where I go out of my way to try to make my wife's day brighter, right? I want to do that. And with that best of intention, do you think I get it right 100% of the time? No.
You don't know where she's coming from at that point too, or what's triggering her, or what's affecting her. So it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So the only thing I can keep trying to do is sort of act in a way that I can stand behind. to act in a way that it's like I'm in alignment with what I believe to be true and correct. In other words, having integrity, really. In other words, I have to live up to my own ideals. So that's why when I say my father gave me a blueprint of all the things that I didn't want to be, that's actually very, very useful. It's actually very useful to see how he failed in an obvious way, because then all I have to do is not do that. And then at least I can feel good about it. You know what I mean?
Love that. I love that you say that. And it's so funny because the question that comes down, did it teach you how to be different with your wife, Morgana? And guys, she's on a 3rd episode that we recorded, but did it teach you to be different or to treat your wife different compared to the way your dad was with your mom?
Oh yeah, no, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to go into too many details because, you know, for all I know, my mother might be listening. But I mean, my father was married a lot. And if he was uncomfortable, he just ran away. And, you know, I think I will say this, when he married the last wife, which by the way, he didn't tell me, I didn't know anything about it. My mother eventually divorced him. But that's because she couldn't find him. She didn't know where he was. So he didn't know that he was divorced from her. He didn't have that information. So he married this woman knowing that he was probably likely still married to my mother. So he was a bigamist. I mean, he's just an interesting, fascinating, bizarre guy. And so what do I learn from that in terms of my relationship with my wife? That means I just have to be really honest with her about everything. You know, I don't have to bang her over the head with my honesty. I always want to make sure that I have a measure of compassion and love for her. I mean, I chose her, so we're a team. You know what I mean? But part of that team is having sometimes challenging conversations, or me getting it wrong, me jumping to a conclusion, or me having a series of feelings about things that may not even be true, you know? But again, I think we keep showing up. The more I get to show up for her, which I don't think my father did very well for my mother. I don't think that. So it means that I have to show up for her. And if she needs me, then you know what I mean? Like I have to find out for myself. I have to ask questions to make sure that I'm in integrity with my wife, and really any relationship.
Absolutely. But I think you're showing up beautifully. I mean, because you have now the No Bride with Chronicles, which, you know, you're marrying your wife in 100 countries, and it's 21 times in 15 countries so far. So I think you're showing up beautifully in that whole essence of just renewing your vows and renewing your intentions, I would think, on a constant basis. Is that what happens every time you guys renew your vows with one another?
Yeah, no, you know, that all started as sort of like a goof for me. It was like we got married a second time, and it was just totally like, let's go in there and get married again. Wouldn't that be hilarious? And when I started saying the vows, and the vows are just things that I make up in the moment, but at the time I was saying those vows, it was like, hey, you know, I think in the first go round of the vows, I don't think I told my wife how I intended to support her goals and visions, even if they don't include me, even if I don't benefit from them. I want her to have the life that she wants to have. That's kind of my obligation, I believe, is to attempt to give her what it was she wanted so she could live well, right?
Yeah.
And she's a successful, strong woman. She doesn't actually need me to do, you know, she doesn't need any of that stuff. Yeah. But whatever it is that she needs, certainly emotionally support, that I need to show up for her. What I didn't understand at the time is that those particular vows made a huge impact on her. That the second set of vows actually gave her more reason to feel solid and secure within the relationship. Wow. It was, you know, in a very woo-woo sort of way, it was a new overlaying invocation. Do you know what I mean? It's like a magic spell saying, I know that we've got this thing in place, and now here's more. and I'm renewing that thing. And it meant something very powerful to her. And so even though it was a goof to me in the moment, and not even the entire moment, but certainly the first half of the moment.
Yeah.
Like I totally got that this was important to her, somewhere halfway through the ceremony. Each successive time, that gives her a sense of hope that the relationship she's in is solid, because it's very easy to feel insecure about one of 10,000 things, because we're human and we're flawed, and some days we do it well and some days we don't.
Absolutely.
And we can't control what the outside world is going to do when you leave the front door. But the hope is that my wife, if nothing else, feels solid within our relationship. And I think that was, that was a big part. Like, I don't know if my parents had that. Now, just for the record, my mother ended up remarrying a guy, or getting married to a different guy. He's a great guy, and I think for the most part treats her kindly. They're not perfect by any means, but you know what I mean? Like, I think they're closer. Like, here's a guy who really wants to do right by her. And I love that, because what else would I want for my mother? I want her to be happy and healthy and feel as though that there's a guy in her corner.
Yes.
And so that's really what I'm trying to, give to my own wife.
But as you guys are renewing your vows, and I follow both of you and your wife on social media, and you guys are literally relationship goals. And I say this on posts, #relationship goals, #goals, because watching the energy and the synchronicity and the love that you guys both embody for each other is so beautiful. So whatever is happening in these vows or in the relationship, you could definitely see the light in how you guys both support one another. And I've always said this, like, even on your wife's page, I'll say, you guys are definitely goals. Like, how do you keep up with, living your life and being there and supporting one another and realizing, there is flaws in the world. And when I watch how she's supporting you with the release of your book, 10,000 Miles of with my dead father's ashes, and I see how she's supporting you, it's like, it brings this renewed joy in knowing that the divine masculine and feminine, when we work together and our energies intertwine so fluid and so beautifully, and knowing that we're there to support one another, things become so much more powerful. So how is it that you feel, and I'm not just talking about your wife right now, I'm talking about just in general, how is it that you feel a man could be fully supported by his wife, his mother, his sisters, his friends, his female friends? What is the best type of advice you could give to the female audience out there that's listening to this?
I kind of want you to rephrase that. Only because I'm hearing multiple questions, and I could answer them all, but I'm not sure I'll be answering the question you want answered.
Okay, perfect. I know, because it all kind of came jumbled together. I realized what I was saying. I was like, that was like 5 questions in one. And see what he says. How is it just in general? Because like I said, you and your wife are definitely goals. So how is it in general? And we're not talking about your wife by any means, but just the feminine energy and the masculine energy. How is it just in general that we could have women supporting the masculine, say the wounded masculine, for example, to be able to rise up, regardless if it's a sister, a lover, a wife, a mother, anybody? How is it that as a man you'd like to be supported?
Okay, so this may sound odd.
Mm-hmm.
But what is perhaps the most useful thing that I believe a woman can do for her husband, man, whatever, the guy in her life that she loves, is that to understand first that most men don't understand women, like at all. Like, I would argue, and we probably don't have time for it because it gets all very woo-woo, and I dive into Kabbalah and a whole bunch of other things. We want to be a hero to the women that we love.
Mm.
But we don't know how to do that. And I think that my wife can raise her eyebrow to one of her female friends, and that female friend already knows all of it. You know what I mean? Like, she can communicate in sort of like a little thing, a small affect, and the woman will pick up on it and she'll run with it, and they both know. They both know, right? They're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
My wife raises an eyebrow at me, and it is just 1,000 feet over my head. I don't know what she's talking about. I want to please her, but I don't understand. And more often than not, I will immediately go to trying to fix the problem. Oh, we'll just do these 5 things. It took me a long time to realize that my wife needed to talk out the problem without me fixing it. You know what I mean? Like, if it were 2 guys in a room and there's a problem, you know, they would go, all right, well, let's just figure out the solution and we'll go fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Women tend to not necessarily want that. I mean, maybe they do ultimately, but in the initial stages of dealing with the problem, my wife is an example, my daughter is an example, my mother is an example, will just want to talk it out.
Yeah, just
to have it be. So to circle back, how can women help their men?
Mm-hmm.
Is understand that we want to be your hero, but we don't know how. What that means is you can't raise your eyebrow, or you can't leave a trail of breadcrumbs that you're going to expect us to find, because honestly, we're not that clever. I hate to say that, but I can give my wife what she wants when I know what it is, but not just a little bit. Like, if she tells me precisely what she wants and how she wants it done, the more information I have, the more likely I can get it done. I just wrote an article for a life coach friend that, you know, my wife ordered a gazebo for the backyard that came in 3 humongous boxes from China.
Wow.
The instructions were terrible, but the picture of what needed to be done was exact.
Mm.
So I could go through those pieces and assemble them because I know what it was going to look like in the end.
Nice.
If my wife tells me what it needs to look like in the end, then I will jump through whatever hoop is necessary to give her what it is that she wants.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a raised eyebrow that doesn't have a clear picture, then I'm left running around guessing, trying to help her. Does that make sense?
Totally. You know what? I totally understand where you're coming from. And I just hear men are simple. Just give them a roadmap and they'll give you exactly what you want. That's exactly what I heard.
Yes. And I think that's true. And I think because we want to be your hero, because we want to support you, and I believe this is true in any relationship.
Yes, I believe so.
If you give your husband the clarity, and by the way, sometimes being clear is terrifying. Asking precisely for what you want is absolutely horrible for most of us. What do you mean I have to? Well, can't I just make it easy on myself? And I suppose you can, but really, if you want to get exactly what it is that you want, then this is what you do. In other words, if you're just going to hope that he's going to figure it out, he's going to disappoint you every single time, and it's not on purpose.
No, it's not. And it's so interesting you say that, because a lot of men that I've spoken to, I belong to a sacred masculine group. I love being in there because I always say it brings hope. And it's so interesting because I posed that question out there and they said, all we want women to know is that we can't read your mind.
Right. No, that nailed it. And by the way, when I give my wife exactly what it is that she wants, she is happy. And when she is happy, guess what happens to me?
You are happy.
I am happy and I have self-esteem. When my wife is like, oh my God, you built that gazebo out of those 3 boxes from China, I feel good about myself.
Yes.
I feel like I did the good thing. I'm good at tasks, but if I don't know what the tasks are, or if I'm sort of just kind of running around guessing at what the tasks could be, then I don't know what the answer is. And that's actually does the opposite effect. So I think what you do is you give your husband, give your boyfriend, give your son a task to do with clarity, and he will run out and he will jump through hoops in order to try to do it. And when he does, and you feel good about it, he's going to feel great.
Oh, I love that you said that. Absolutely. Because it does start from a young age when it comes to, birthing these great recognitions of who you are, and your awesomeness and your superpowers does come from an early age. Just that back in our days, I guess in the 60s and 70s, we've been wounded, but thank God things are slowly changing in this new era that we're coming forth.
Yeah, no, I think there's also, I think with this new era, I mean, there's a lot of confusion that comes with it as well, because I think we're tackling problems and we don't know, I don't know if anybody really has like some sort of generic solution for everybody in every moment, but I think we are becoming more conscious. And I think that within itself is a good thing. I think we are learning that it's not merely we just pull up ourselves by our bootstraps, which was probably the advice that my father was probably given, which meant that if he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and succeeded, fantastic. But if he didn't, then it was probably time to run away. And that's why people get married, 7 times. And it's probably why people, when they, lose a job, feel the need to leave town and run away, pull geographics, because staying in a place, with what is a perceived failure is really uncomfortable.
Yes. Oof. Wow. So many truths. Devin, thank you for being on the podcast. This has been, I could sit here and talk to you over and over, because just the wisdom you have inside of you, your stories they're so colorful in so many ways, just the way you put your words together. And my heart is so open right now, just speaking to you. It's incredible. I look forward to diving into this book that you have written. 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. Guys, go get the book. Just that 3 pages I read has got me literally thinking on such a different level, and just opening my heart to recognize so many things about myself and so many things about the people around me, and how to perceive things differently, just as Devin did with his Aunt Alice and Aunt Jessie on those phone calls. It is something that will allow you to expand your awareness and expand your heart, and knowing that people aren't doing things to be malicious towards you. They're just who they are, and you can't change that at the end of the day. So Devin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I love to read this book and get you back on here, because I know that there would be a lot of little tidbits of information that we could share with a lot of people.
Well, it would be my honor, Zach. I'm so grateful to be here. And can I just throw up my website URL?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say all the social handles are going to be in the show notes underneath. But Devin, go ahead and throw us all the information for people to get a hold of you.
Yeah, if you want to find out a little bit more about me, or my book, or coaching, or any of those kinds of things, feel free to check me out at devingallaudet.com, spelled because nobody gets it right, is Devin Galaudet, GALAUDET.com.
Thank you so much. And like I said, everyone, all the information is in the show notes just below. Get a hold of Devin, get on Amazon, get this book, especially for the masculine energy out there, the sacred masculine. This book will show you what toxicity is like when it comes to a father that is trying to figure out his own life, and how it imprints into a child. But it also shows you how you could rise above any situation, any circumstance, to be the greatest husband out there. Just like I always say, Devin is relationship goals with his beautiful wife. So get a hold of Devin, read his book, and then even you could see him on tour, because I know he's touring around with his book right now. So thank you once again, Devin.
Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
Such a pleasure. Catch you guys all next week on Awaken Men Mondays. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.